Welcome, bet riders around the world. My name is Gary Solomon, and you're watching the Laid Back Bike Report. Well, it's a treat to have you all with us today, guys. Let me tell you what we've got going on today's show. First of all, we're going to kick it off as usual with Honza Galla. He's not with us live, but he sent us a report, a news report from the Czech Republic with some interesting items in that. I think you'll enjoy it. We also have a profile of a friend of ours, Zach Kaplan, who is the owner of Zach Kaplan Cycles. Been around for a long time in the bent industry. I think you'll enjoy learning more about Zach. And then we have our major segment today, which is about e-assist, battery, safety, regulations, and legal aspects, all to do with how you can best prepare yourself to ride your e-assist in a safe manner and maybe see what's going to be coming up regulation-wise here in the U.S. So for that, we have Doug Davis, who's going to, first of all, kick it off with a primer about e-assist batteries, talking to us about how they're made, what's in there, and various safety aspects of it, how you can keep yourself safe. And then we have a couple of special guests. Jay Townley and Steve Hansen are with us. Jay and Steve are experts in legislation and regulation with regard to bikes and especially e-assist, which of course is what we're talking about today. So you'll learn more about what insurance you may need to look at and how you can best do that, and what the government may have in mind for our e-assists in the coming months and years. And with that, I think we're going to jump in and meet the crew that I have with us today. Just a couple of us here. Larry, you want to pop the crew up here? And there we go. First of all, in Colorado Springs, it is our friend, the director, Larry Seidman. Hey, Larry.
Hey, Gary.
And down in Raymond, Mississippi, right? Yeah, it is our pal, Trey Burgoyne.
Howdy, folks. Good to be here.
Trey handling the media as usual. And down in near Dallas, Texas, anyways, it is Doug Davis. Doug, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, Gary. Good to be here.
It's great to have you. All right, guys. Now, if you'd like to participate in the live chat, which we have going both on Facebook and also on YouTube, you can do so and tell us. Oh, you can tell us where you are, where you're watching from. You can comment on the show, interact with our guests, ask questions. That's the best way to do that. So join in on the live chat if you can. And if you'd like to support us on the Laid Back Bike Report, you can like us on Facebook. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, and you can click the little white eye up there. It'll take you to the Laid Back Bike Report website, where you can find out a lot more about our past shows and what we have coming up. And you can become a Patreon supporter, which we really appreciate, like all these folks right here. If you'd like to do that, we really appreciate the support there. You can do it for as little as $1 a month. Now, our show is sponsored by some amazing industry folks, and let me tell you about who they are. First of all, TerraCycle, makers of exquisite recumbent parts and accessories for your bent, and Trailside Trikes, a fine recumbent trike shop on the Withlacoochee Trail in Florida and now in Knoxville, Tennessee as well. And TerraTrike Green Speed, the best in leisure, performance, adventure, touring, electric, and portability. Wherever your adventure leads, TerraTrike will take you there. And Green Speed where Ian Sims designs bring performance through science and engineering. And Laidback Cycles, the top USA dealer for TerraTrike and the premier source for CatTrike, Ice, and Greenspeed. We give you the freedom to ride. And Avenue Trikes. With the gearing you need and the comfort you want, it's time to enjoy riding again. They're in stock, ready to ship, and only $19.95. Dealer inquiries are welcome. And Azub. This company is a 3-time winner of the Trike of the Year award and has brought several unique technological solutions to the world of recumbent bikes, including the titanium front suspension on the Tie-Fly Trike. Combined with the tuned rear suspension, it provides its owner with absolute comfort throughout the ride. And Recumbent PDX. With a 150 trike inventory, Recumbent PDX is the West Coast's only CatTrike megastore. We have over 20 trikes on our showroom floor just waiting for you to test ride through our beautiful Portland neighborhood. Call or email to schedule your test ride today. And Eco Cycles, leaders in electric assist and customer support, with a line of specialized conversion kits to retrofit just about any bent model out there. Check them out at cycles.eco right now. All right, guys, let's jump right into the show with the recumbent news with Honza. Larry, let's hear what Honza had to say today.
Hi guys, Honza Galla from Recumbent.news here, once again. This time I have one major news item for you. It's from TerraTrike, and it is about their new e-assisted trike called Charge. It is based on the Maverick model, so it is a kind of basic trike, but it has a Promovec hub motor in the rear wheel, of course, with 350 watts the nominal power of the motor, also 43 newton meters of torque and 374 watt hours the capacity of the battery. The trike weighs 47 pounds or 21.3 kilos, which is a kind of low weight for an electric trike, I would say. And the load limit is 275 pounds and 125 kilos. So this is the news from the recumbent industry, let's say. And then, I told you last time that I'm going to visit Lauchringen, where the Spezi show will be organized next year, April, end of April. So I posted a short trailer, basically a vlog from my tour. It was more from the journey from the Czech Republic to Lauchringen, about the journey, not than about the place itself. And I'm going to publish 2 new videos where you will be able to see all the halls and the industrial area and all the details there. But for you, the viewers of Laidback Bike Report today, I have a first few shots I did on the drone and with my camera. So here they are. You can see Lauchringen there. You can see the hall from outside. You can see how the test track will go around the hall. And near the river, you can see how we will enter the hall, how we will ride in the hall as well, but you have to imagine the booth being there, and there will be a lot of them, and you can feel the industrial atmosphere from the shots. So I hope you like it, and I recommend you to subscribe for the Recumbent News YouTube channel, where I will publish the 2 more videos in the next coming days. So stay tuned and enjoy today's Laid Back Bike report till the end. Have a nice day. Bye.
All right. Thank you, Honza. Yeah, really looking forward to seeing his videos from the Spezi site. Honza always does a great job with those, and that trip looked really interesting. So we'll look forward to that. And the Terratrike charge that he talked about. Turns out we will be talking a little bit about that later in the show. So Honza, we appreciate it. All right. Well, let's kick off the regular part of the show then with our interview with Zach Kaplan of Zach Kaplan Cycles. Larry, let's have a look. Guys, I am here with my pal Zach Kaplan of Zach Kaplan Cycles. Zach, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine.
It is great to have you on the show at long last. And I thought we would take a few minutes to talk about your story. Many people know about you and your shop, but I don't know if they know that much about you. So we're going to get into some details. You have an interesting story, and I'd like to start, if we could, Zach, with your personal history a bit, and then we'll talk about your bicycling and recumbent history. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your background.
Yes, I was born in San Francisco, California, and I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I moved to Olympia, Washington to go to college at the Evergreen State College. I was very into vehicles and driving, and I took a road trip in 1990 to Alaska and the northwest part of Canada. And it was coming back from this trip that the car broke down in Lillooet, British Columbia. And I had already been thinking on that trip that I was not going to have a car for a while. I was thinking of experimenting with being car free because I was aware of both the environmental impacts of driving, and also at that time in 1990, things were ramping up for the Gulf War. In the autumn of 1990, and I was listening a lot on the radio as I drove on this trip about that, and I really didn't want to be contributing to usage of imported oil. So I was figuring I would get rid of the car when I returned, but the decision was made for me. It broke down on a dirt road outside of Lillooet. And I ended up being car-free for almost 13 years.
All right, Zach, why don't we focus now more on how you got into recumbent biking? So we understand that you learned the importance of not having a car, using bicycling for most all of your needs. But how did the recumbent cycling come about?
Well, I had been thinking I would eventually have a fleet of various kinds of cycles. I was interested in all types. I wanted to have one of each style. So I figured I would eventually get a recumbent, but it wasn't high on my priority list. And in 1991, the League of American Wheelmen had their annual rally at the campus of Evergreen State College, which I was attending. And I went to the rally, and there was someone named Bob Bryant who had a booth there, and he was giving out sample copies of his little magazine called Recumbent Cyclist News. And he also had a flyer that had questions and answers, common questions about recumbents or myths, and what the actual facts are about it. And I looked at that, and it all made sense to me. And he let me test ride a recumbent, and it was the first recumbent I ever rode. It was a DH 1000 long wheelbase with remote above seat steering. And I was already could tell I wasn't really into that particular design of recumbent, but it gave me a good taste of what sitting down while cycling was, and it felt like coming home. It was just so comfortable, and the heads up riding position, and it just felt really right. And I knew I had to make getting a recumbent a higher priority.
So what
But
is this picture here, Zach? How does this fit into the picture?
This is my first recumbent that I got in 1992. It's a Counterpoint Presto, and I bought it from Angle Lake Cyclery in Seattle. Dealt with Calvin Clark and Dale Clark there. They were both at the shop back then. And
Right, but this is before Kelvin moved on
right.
to Colorado, right?
Right. And it was fairly close to where I was living. In fact, I actually rode to their shop to do test riding, and the ride back on my touring bike was just really miserable in comparison to I had just ridden a recumbent. And I also did Bob Bryant was on the side selling recumbents out of his garage, and I visited him in 1991 and also tested a bunch of recumbents with him. But I ended up getting the Counterpoint Presto from Angle Lake Cycler. They were the exclusive dealer for it. But what really led up to this that accelerated the path towards recumbency was in 1991, toward the end of the summer, I set off from Olympia to San Francisco on an upright bike. My idea was to do a self-supported tour, and I really didn't know much of what I was doing, and basically had horrible pain from the saddle. And after the third day of the tour, I ended up having to hitchhike back to Olympia. I couldn't take it anymore, and I vowed that I will come back the next summer and do this tour on a recumbent.
All right, so
that is
Zach,
what I ended up doing.
Yeah, let's. You know what? I think the folks would like to see the pantheon of recumbents that you have had over the years, and I think a good way to do that is to do it with some pictures showing you touring over the years on these bikes, and you can talk about the tours and then the recumbent bikes that you use for them. So why don't we start going through some of these? I think that might be worthwhile. So let's start here. Is that still your Counterpoint?
Yeah, that was taken in 93. That's my 92 Counterpoint Presto in Zion Park in Utah. It was on the way back from the Human Powered Vehicle Speed Championships in Blaine, Minnesota, which the previous photo was taken there. That's Alex Smolton on the left and myself on the right. And that's the one time I met him was he attended the Human Powered Vehicle Speed Championships in Blaine, Minnesota in 93. I actually drove there with Dale Clark from Angle Lake Cyclery.
Okay.
From
And
Seattle.
now this Lightning, tell us a little bit about your interaction with Lightning. Did you get this F40 from Tim Brummer, or what's the story here?
Yes, I got this my first recumbent, the Counterpoint Presto, ended up getting stolen in Santa Monica shortly after I got back from that trip. I got a ride back from Minnesota from someone who lived in Santa Monica, and I was then going to ride back from there. And I had it locked up briefly, and it got stolen. So I needed another recumbent, and I had already pretty much come up against all the limitations of the Counterpoint Presto design. I was very interested in the Lightning F40, and so I had been starting to get interested in the Lightning F40, and I rode back got a carpool back from Minnesota with Greg Duvall, who had been racing a Lightning F40 at the event there. And I'd actually had my first test ride on F40 in Blaine. So I was really intrigued with it, and it was a perfect opportunity to upgrade since the Counterpoint Presto got stolen. And I was also writing articles for Recumbent Cyclist News at the time, and I approached Lightning about getting a test bike to write a review of it. And so that this bike I originally got to review for, and I did write a review for Recumbent Cyclist News. And this photo here is basically the same type of fairing, but it's on a carbon fiber R84. And this photo was taken at a event at Easy Racers at their original factory in Watsonville. They used to periodically have get-togethers, and I actually rode down from San Francisco to do they had a group ride, and then I rode back all one day. I left before dawn.
All right, and then I think you started maybe doing some more widespread touring, other parts of the world as well. Tell us about what we have here.
Well, this is I went to Europe in 1999 to do Paris-Brest-Paris, and before that, there was the World Human Power Championships was happening in Interlaken, Switzerland, and I visited that. And that bike is a Crystal Engineering Festina. It was made by Peter Ross, and that photo was taken in a kind of a little parade around Interlaken that I participated in.
And what was it like?
What
was it like doing Paris-Brest-Paris on a recumbent?
Well, it's really the only way I could see doing such a long ride because of I don't know how people do those rides on upright bikes. It was very comfortable. The only pains I had were in my knees. The main issue was sleep deprivation.
Right.
But as far as my own comfort went, that was very comfortable.
And what about this?
This was a early Recumbents of the East Bay group ride. We used to ride on the Bay Trail to Point Richmond. This group years later became the Bay Area Recumbent Cyclists Group. But I'm on in this photo, I'm in the orange jacket standing next to a Ice XL with a fairing on it.
And so now we're going to start talking about your interactions with trikes, which was a new thing. Tell us about that.
Well, I got my first trikes in 1998. One was a Greenspeed GTS, and the other was a Earth Cycles Dragonflyer. I actually ordered the Greenspeed earlier, but because I was waiting for a new version that would have a different type of disc brake that the kingpins had to be redesigned for, there was a delay with that. So the first one I actually received was a Earth Cycles Dragonflyer with rear suspension. And I got my first ice trike in 2001. And this in this photo, I'm riding an ice Mini.
Very nice. And then you started having some experience with Bicetta. So tell us about these Bicetta bikes.
Yes, I've been carrying Bicetta since they started in 2002, and this is a Thai Aero, and it's a 2003 model. I still have it. And that is my first carbon fiber Bicetta. It's the original Carbon Aero 2006 model. I still have that, although I don't ride it anymore. And that photo was taken on the Terrible 2 Double Century. I tended to use that one mostly for really long hilly rides where I wanted the bike to be as light as possible, but my tastes have changed.
All right. Well, speaking of changes, there came a time when you met someone and decided it was time to get married, and you had a wedding that was a little different than maybe most people's. Tell us about your wedding.
Yeah, well, part of the wedding consisted of a group ride from Muir Beach to Muir Woods and back, and that's my wife and I on our double vision tandem. It's actually one of my oldest bikes. I got it in 1999, and I actually met her like most of the people I've met since 1991. I met her through Recumbents. She contacted me looking for a recumbent, and I didn't have what she needed in stock. I recommended a small Easy Racers Tour Easy would be best for her, and I referred her directly to Easy Racers. They had a small one there. She went and test rode it and ordered one, and I didn't see her until later on. This was back in 2001. Their Easy Racers used to have something called the Return to Freedom, which was a rally at their factory that they would have annually. And that's the first time I met her in real life. But I'm quite shy and didn't really talk much. And then years later, I started to see her on those recumbents of the East Bay rides, and also didn't talk much with her there. And my first significant talks with her were on my bike club, the Grizzly Peak Cyclist, in 2008 had a little tandem rally where they matched up people who had tandems with people who wanted to ride them, and or people who already had tandem couples rode together, and they put us together because they knew we both had recumbents, and that's
The
our
rest
first.
is history, as they say.
Yes,
And so,
right. We got married in 2009. So this is my 2010 HP Velotechnic Speed Machine at a rest stop on the Davis Double Century. There's the same bike climbing a road in the East Bay Hills. Do club rides on it, mostly with the Grizzly Peak Cyclist, and that one there was on the Carmel Valley Double Century, riding the Vaqueta Tie Arrow. And this one was taken at the Tater Tot event in Idaho. Uh, most of the people stay on the trail, but my wife and I did a ride over Dobson Pass up to the top of Thompson Pass, and this was on the hottest Tot I've ever been to in 2015, and I was riding the green HP Velotechnic Grasshopper FX, and you can kind of see my wife's Lightning P38 in that photo. This one, Google Street View got me riding my Grasshopper on Grizzly Peak Boulevard in the Berkeley Hills.
do you remember seeing the camera in the car when that happened? Or
No, I don't, but I see a lot of those cars around. So it was actually a customer alerted me to, he happened to be looking at Google Maps and happened to notice me and alerted me to it. So that's how I found out about it. Yeah, there I am riding the Vaqueta Tie Arrow again on the Terrible 2 Double Century. That one is doing a ride with the Grizzly Peak Cyclists on the HP Velotechnic Grasshopper. This one a friend took of me climbing some hill, climbing up from the Silicon Valley on my HP Velotechnic Scorpion FS26S pedal electric assist. That was my first Catrike 700, and I did the Davis Double Century on it, and the number is 333. That's the number they assigned me. I thought that was kind of interesting that I happened to be riding a trike and they assigned me 333. That's my current Catrike 700, the 2018 model. It's got wider tires. I put a smaller diameter rim in the back, 584 millimeter rim, so I can run a 48 millimeter tire in the back for smoother ride on the rough roads around here. This one was taken in 2018 after I completed my 100th double century. I received this award from the California Triple Crown Association for doing 100 double centuries.
and then Zach, you talked a little bit about some people who had an influence on you. You mentioned Robert Bryan, but this gentleman also had some influence on you as well when you were younger. Tell us about these people that have influenced your life and life in biking.
Yeah, this is Conrad Oho, and he was highly influential, really a mentor to me. I met him at the 1992 Human Powered Vehicle Speed Championships in Wairega, California. He came up to my Counterpoint Presto and started talking to me about various technical aspects of it, and we got into a long technical discussion, and I felt very, very at ease talking with him. And he gave me his card, and when I moved back to California in 1993, I got in touch with him, and I started visiting his shop, which was when I first met him. His shop was in a garage in Corte Madera. He later moved to a garage in Fairfax, and he was really highly eccentric, the most eccentric person I've ever known. His shops had concrete floors, and he built a little loft where he stayed above the shop, and very few windows, and lived very minimally, and no heat. He was very detail oriented, and everything he did for a reason. He modified just about everything he owned to make it better. He was always working on improving things. His last name, Oho, is actually stood for Optimum Health Optimist. And it could be viewed in any direction as a totally symmetrical name, a palindrome. And so he was really taught me a lot about working on bikes, and he turned me on to wide tires. I went to many Interbike shows with him over the years.
All right. So great influence on you. Now, the next gentleman you've already mentioned a little bit earlier, and he should be familiar if he's not to most of our viewers, and it's Robert Bryan. And I think you've talked a little bit about him already. In this middle picture here behind him, also Kelvin Clark that you mentioned earlier. So you talked about Robert, but if you could, could you tell us what influence Robert had on you? What did you learn from Robert that stays with you today?
Well, the first thing I learned was that recumbents are a perfectly acceptable type of bike to ride. I mean, he showed me that through the information that he provided when I first met him, and he also he gave me an opportunity to write. I ended up writing quite a few articles for Recumbent Cyclist News. He saw my writings in there was a Counterpointers newsletter for Counterpoint owners, and I wrote an article about how I set up my bike from a frame set and set up with a unique selection of components. And I guess after he saw that, he invited me to write for him. And it's been an ongoing, I still keep in touch with him.
All right. And now let's move on to a third person who you had mentioned. I believe not only did you buy a bike from Tim, but he also had a bit of an influence on you as well. Tell us about Tim Bromer.
Yeah, he hired me in 1994. This is after I had written the article. At the time, I was a bike messenger in San Francisco, short-term job, and he invited me to move to Lompoc and work for him, and I ended up doing a lot of things I do today, basically assembling bikes, some answering phones, ordering parts.
Right. And this is really where we want to go next, I think. So we're going to start talking about your shop. And as owner of a Recumbent bike shop, you also have traveled around a bit to bike events and trade events. Is this from an Interbike? Is that what you told me?
Yeah, this was taken at the 2004 Interbike, and it's a special photo because Sheldon Brown took it. It's the one only time I met him, and it was taken at the Greenspeed booth.
Yeah. And Sheldon Brown, if viewers, if you don't know who Sheldon Brown was, he passed away a number of years ago, Just Google Sheldon Brown bicycle, and he was like basically a guru of everything bicycle, an amazing gentleman. So, all right, well, let's talk about the shop then. So, here's the exterior. Tell us a little bit about your shop, if you would, Zach.
Well, a shop, it doesn't have a conventional storefront. It has very few windows. It kind of has a feel similar to Conrad's shop, and it's got a concrete floor and no heat, and it's by appointment only. I've always been by appointment only. I find this way I can focus on the individual and not have any distractions. They get my undivided attention.
Why don't you tell us what brands you carry in your shop?
Well, I've carried a lot of different brands over the years. I've seen a lot of brands come and go. And the current brands I'm carrying are Azub, Baketta, Catrike, HP Velotechnic, and Lightning.
Okay. Very good. Now, you do some, obviously you do some setup of the bikes and trikes there and some degree of maintenance. Is doing that stuff, is the building and the maintenance your favorite thing?
No, not particularly. I do like setting up new bikes, but I don't particularly care for working on used, dirty bikes that, especially if they've been abused. Yeah, I really like setting up new ones. I guess my favorite part of the job is the working with people, meeting people, and helping people find solutions. I've quite a few of my customers have ended up becoming long-term friends.
And even spouses, apparently.
Right.
So, okay, let's talk about this. Is an important part because I think most of our viewers can identify with this. We've all made a lot of friends through riding recumbents, either at events or just online and that kind of thing. Now, here's a friend that actually is more commercial nature. Who's this gentleman here outside the shop?
Yeah, this is Stefan from HP Velotechnic. He unfortunately he stopped working there last year, but we had quite a lot of nice email exchanges, and he visited my shop twice and stayed at our house. So yeah, I miss working with him.
Yeah, Stefan was a great guy, and he is a great guy. He's just not with HP anymore. And now here's a mutual friend of ours. Who's that?
Yeah, that's Sylvia. Um, this photo was taken on coming back from a bark ride, Bay Area Recumbent Cyclist ride last November of 2021. We did a tour around San Francisco, and we took the ride started in Alameda. We took the ferry to and from, and someone took this photo of us coming back from that.
All right. Now, what happened here?
This was taken on a bark ride last year. Normally, our rides are on roads or paved trails, but this one was an off-road ride in the Marina Headlands, where we visited 3 beaches, and we visited Tennessee Valley Cove Beach, and I was trying to turn around. The trail had become kind of sandy, and I got stuck in the sand. So this is Alan trying to push me to free me from the sand.
All right. And tell me about this.
Yeah, this is my Baketta Carbon Trike 2.0, now a classic since they're out of production. It was taken on a bark ride, one of the third Sunday rides to Point Richmond.
And I think to bring us fully up to date, what do we have here?
This is my newest trike. I got it last year. It's a Aza Tyfly X with a Shimano EP8 motor and a roll-off hub. And in this photo, I'm riding it in the Alameda 4th of July parade.
All right. Now, Zach, I wanted to ask you, since our show today is a lot of the show is going to be talking about e-assist and e-assist safety. I know that you've changed your riding habits over the years. Early on, just purely human powered, but of late you are riding mostly e-assist, if I understand correctly. Tell me about your thoughts about that. Why are you riding e-assist these days, and what do you think of it?
Yeah, I first got a taste of e-assist riding when my friend Bill Bushnell let me ride his Easy Racers Gold Rush that he converted to e-assist back around 2010. And I didn't actually get my own e-assist until 2013 when HP Technic introduced the Scorpion FS26S Pedelec, and I've actually been riding that model quite a bit since then. I'm on my fourth one. And these days I do most of my riding on e-assist because I ride still mostly for transportation, and the higher speeds are a way of bridging the gap between bicycle speeds and automotive speeds, and allows me to keep up with traffic better. And it also, I've been using it on some club rides because it allows me to keep up with road bikes, climbing hills without overexerting myself. Back in the old days, I used to run some really high heart rates on my Baquetas, trying to keep up on club rides, and I don't believe that's good long term. With e-assist, I can dial in just as much assist as I need, keep my heart rate at a decent level, so I'm still getting a good workout, but not too much, because there is too much of a good thing. And
Okay, great. Now let's finish up with this. You talked earlier about being mostly car free, and you're making a delivery here. Is that what this is about?
it's actually, yes, not really a delivery. It's bringing a wheel to my friend Bill Bushnell in Sunnyvale. He's my e-bike guru, and he's the one who really got me into e-bikes. And I was basically just bring a wheel to him, and not to give to him though, just to do a small modification to. And I also, at the same time, I delivered a part to a customer who met me at Bill's house.
So
So
mostly,
this,
if you can, you do deliver items from the shop on a bike or trike with a trailer if you can, but you also have a vehicle if necessary for bigger items.
right, actually, most of my shipping, I deliver the item to the post office or the UPS store on my trike with a trailer as needed. I normally only deliver parts to people on a human power vehicle if I am combining with a ride. I didn't just set out to go to Sunnyvale specifically to do that. But yeah, I do have I broke my span of being car free in August of 2002. I bought a van, but I drive very seldom. I haven't driven it since mid October. So and it's here it is in January.
Right. Right. There's no litmus test, I don't think. I think you clearly do most of what you can car free, and that's great. So, all right, Zach, I think we're going to probably leave it there. Did you have any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk a bit about myself. I don't normally do this. Yeah, recumbents have really changed my life in every way. My whole life revolves around them, and I would just say, follow your passion.
That is super. All right, Zach, thank you, pal. We will see you again soon.
Right. Bye.
And there we go. We're seeing him right now. There is Zach Kaplan from the Bay Area, the very moist Bay Area, I understand right now. Zach, thanks for doing that interview with me. I have a couple things I want to ask you before we let you go here. First, we do have a question that from Sean Swanger, who actually here in Ohio. Hi, Sean. How do you ship your ASIP trikes? Let's widen this out a little bit. You mentioned that you use the van sometimes for shipping. What is the area that you deal with as far as customers go? Is it just the Bay Area? Do you sometimes deal with people further afoot and ship things to them? How does that go?
Well, most of my recumbent sales are in the Bay Area, but I do ship several per year to other parts of the U.S. and occasionally other countries. Parts, though, I often do ship those to all over the world.
All right.
So how I actually ship them, I generally use the trike to take it to the post office or the UPS store, and then let them take it from there.
All right. All right, Zach. So that's really all I have for you right now. Now, I hope that you'll stick with us for the rest of the show. I know you are a part of and are interested in what we're going to be talking about here, e-assist and batteries and safety and such. So let us know, and I would encourage you to come up and comment or question anything that comes up after this. But for now, I think we are going to say so long and move on to the next segment. So thanks a lot, Zach.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Okay, folks. So let's do that. We're going to kick off the e-assist segment here with our buddy Doug Davis. Most of you know that besides owning a recumbent bike shop, Doug is also an electrical engineer. He knows a little something about e-assist, motors, batteries, and that sort of thing. So he's going to tell us what he knows about that. And we'll be back afterwards to answer your questions. We've already got a bunch of them in here. So watch this. If you have questions, pop them onto the chat, and we'll engage Doug with those afterwards. So, Larry, let's see what Doug had to say.
All right, thank you, Gary. This is Doug Davis. You guys know me mostly as a Velomobile man, but we actually do quite a bit more here at Bicycle Evolution. And with that, let me get right into the slides. So today we're going to talk about e-bikes, what they are, some best practices around them, and some recommendations that we have put forward on how to manage them. In 2015, Bicycle Evolution was founded specifically to focus on adaptive assistive cycles, and that includes recumbents, hand cycles, and of course, velomobiles. In 2019, just before the pandemic, we had a customer of ours that was paralyzed in an accident. There weren't any qualified forensic investigators around. They asked us for help. We didn't really know what we would do for them, but through a very long process, we established a company called Cycle Evolution Forensics, and we're granted a Texas investigative license. And since then, we have been involved in bicycle accidents, and specifically e-bike and recumbent accidents and forensics. As of 2022, Cycling Evolution Forensics has been involved in 9 cases related to e-bikes and insurance claims. We've offered forensic analysis, expert testimony, and legal organizational aid, legal operational aid, as needed for these. And that's we're going to go into some of this as we talk about these, but it's been kind of an interesting trip, and we've learned a lot along the way. So let's start with a basic primer on e-bikes. Now, we've done this before on the show, but just to catch everybody up to speed, there are different kinds of e-assists out there. There is a hub motor e-assist, which is basically a motor that's laced into a wheel, typically on the rear, but sometimes on the front of a bicycle or a tricycle. There is a bottom bracket motor or a mid-drive. And the reason it's called a bottom bracket motor is because on a traditional bicycle, it's at the bottom of the frame. That's where your pedals go. On a recumbent, of course, our pedals are out front. They're not at the bottom, so they're also called a mid-drive motor. And then there's a battery and a charging system that are involved in this, and that's where your energy storage comes from. And we're going to talk quite a bit about this coming forward in these slides. And there is software, and that's the software that is either in the motor or in the controller that goes along with the bike or the trike. And typically the newer systems, that's all embedded. In the older systems, there was actually an external box that lived on the bike frame somewhere where the controller was. We've gotten a little better at that technology-wise, and these things are living inside the motor or the controller themselves. So for now, though, let's talk about batteries, because this is the important part and a large topic in the industry these days. As a storage unit based on technology where there is a chemical reaction inside of a solid matter that moves electrons from one side to the other. Unlike a regular battery, though, these things are incredibly dense. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But the lithium battery moves moves electrons from the anode to the cathode when it's charging or discharging, and from the cathode to the anode when it's charging. And so basically, it's a process that's electrically reversed. So you push, think about this as water. You push water into the bucket through a pipe, and it fills up, and then you take water back out that pipe when you're wanting to use it. And that's a good analogy on how the lithium-ion batteries work. On an e-bike or a trike, or e-trike, you're not really buying a battery. You have this big black box, typically they're black boxes, but there could be other things. And it's not really one battery. It's actually a series of batteries inside there. And these are typically little bitty batteries. They look like fat AA cells that are soldered together and series in parallel so that the battery pack will equal to the current and the power rating and the voltage rating that the bicycle system requires. And this is one of the things we're going to talk about quite a bit here in a minute when we get the recommendations. But this is one of the key things about this is most people don't really understand that this is not just a solid battery. It's a bunch of little batteries and a piece of software called a battery management system that lives inside of this that kind of controls how things work. And these are some failure points you need to know about. Now, what's really interesting to this, and Jay, one of our other speakers, mentioned this the other day, and I actually went and looked this up. The energy equivalent of one of these little bitty batteries when it's fully charged is more than an M80. So now you kind of start thinking about this. When you look at this package here, there's dozens of these little batteries. That means there's dozens of the energy output of these M80s sitting inside this small compact box. And that's something that you need to kind of understand about how the energy works on these things. And you got a lot of density in a very small space, and if it's not managed properly, that can cause an issue. So let's talk about the issues. Fires. In 2022, there were 24 major news stories reported about e-bike fires. Now, one thing we need to be really careful about, when we talk about e-bikes and e-trikes, we think of human-powered vehicles that have been adapted to operate with an assist. The industry and the fire departments, they don't really see anything different about an e-bike versus a scooter or a hoverboard or things like that. So when you look through these, some of these are really not e-bikes, they're scooters or other things. But since they're all closely related, they all have these same battery systems in them. They get lumped together by the fire departments and by the news stories and things like that. So, but they also, for a good reason, have all the sorts of the same problems. They have the same energy density. So you need to really understand that when you're talking about all these fires, they all came from the same source products. And that's really an industry issue that everybody's kind of working on now that's come to the forefront. So what do I do? How do I mitigate fire issues? And this is important. Most of the fires that have occurred during charging. And the reason it occurs during charging oftentimes is because it's left on for long past the time that it's supposed to charge up. But let's start with the basics. Always use a manufacturer's charging cord, a power adapter made specifically for the bike. This is kind of important because some of these are power rated, some of these are fused, some of these have electronics in them, lots of stuff that goes on with these there. And some of them are just, plain old, 67C IEN kind of charge, but you don't know. Never leave it unattended. That means you don't plug it in and go have dinner with the wife or the kids. You plug it in, let it charge. If you're leaving, unplug it. Take it, come back, plug it back in. The battery doesn't care. You're not like living. It's not like the NICADs where cycles mattered. Charge it up when you're nearby and you can see it. So the same thing is, don't leave it charging overnight. A lot of the fires that have occurred in that news listing that we show have occurred overnight. And then we recommend, and this is something we recommend that the industry adopt, is to put a manual cutoff charger on it, because we're humans, we forget stuff. The thing is sitting in the garage, it's charging up, and we fall asleep on the couch, we watch TV, we get kids' things going on, we don't know that it's turned off. So you can go for like $10 on Amazon, you can buy yourself a mechanical timer and just set it for, the battery takes 6-8 hours to fully charge, set it for 12 hours, and then you know it's off and it's not sitting there cooking. Use smoke detectors. So if you're, and this is something else, again, we tell our customers, if you're going to charge your e-bike, put it under a smoke detector so the slightest little smoke that comes out of it will trigger the stuff up. Trigger the smoke detector and you'll get an alert. That's almost better than anything else on the recommendations to make sure that happens. And then use some common sense. If the battery overheats, it smells, it leaks, you hear noises, and the noises are like, you'll hear it hissing. Long before these things cook off, you'll hear them hissing. You need to, don't charge it. Take it somewhere to let it look at it or stop and stop using it. And if you have any suspicions that it's defective at all, stop using it. Don't take chances here. It's not worth it. It's better to call 911 and, let them deal with it. Again, some common sense stuff: store batteries at room temperature. Don't put them in the sunlight. Don't put them near anything flammable. They're one of the ones that we didn't get involved in, but we counseled about it a little bit. Was somebody had their e-bike leaning up against the propane tank, and that was bad. Fortunately, nobody got hurt. And then, don't put an e-bike in the middle of your exit, and don't put it in a child's room for all the obvious reasons. Now, let's talk a second about what causes these things to catch fire before I go on to the next recommendations. Two things we know of, we've seen consistently out there, and other people have too, is the battery has some kind of internal damage. And that can be due to disuse. It could be due to bad soldering at the manufacturer. It could be due to a lot of things. Don't care about why. But something happened inside the battery casing. So remember, that battery's made up of a lot of cells. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong. One thing goes wrong is that the cells get old, they weaken internally, and they start consuming more power than they normally would when they're charged up. So one of the issues that we've seen is that the battery will charge up, and there's a weak spot in the barrier that you saw in that picture, and it continues to leak current across as it's charging. So it never really tells the battery charging system to shut off. So because you've got packages of these things, there's 5, 6, 7 packs of batteries in there, the one that's in there is still pulling current. The others are getting current because the BMS separates it, and they heat up. So now you've got a potential problem with this packaging, where you have the situation where this battery might overheat to the point where one of the cells catches fires and ruptures. That's a big issue here. It's not necessarily going to happen, and certainly it's not likely to happen. Obviously, 24 out of as many e-bikes have been sold this year, but it's a real thing. So one of the things you can do is, after the battery's charged, if you kind of get an idea how long it takes to charge, is go feel the casing. If you feel any warm spots around it, maybe that battery needs to get checked out. If everything's normal, fine, go on and move on. So that's one way that we've seen that they cook off. The other way is there's physical damage to it. And this is one we've had in the store. We've had people bring batteries in. My kid was in a wreck. I broke this. I ran into a tree, whatever happened. And there's physical damage to the battery casing that's there. And inside, the cells are damaged. And you just don't even fool with those things, because there's too much potential that chemically one of those cells has been damaged inside, and will not only take a charge, but to pull too much current through it, heat up, and then you have a fire potential. So those are the two main reasons: physical damage and chemical damage in these things. The physical damage causes by an impact event, and the chemical damage just causes because it's older, it's been hot, what have you. One of the things that we'll talk about it a little bit is about using the bike and what to look for when you start out. So let's go back to the slides. When you're operating an e-bike, is a good segue to this. Make sure all the connectors are not damaged, and that's really important. I've seen this constantly, where people will bring a bike into our store and there will be damage on the connectors, and they'll say, "My bike, it runs, but then the the power stops, or it charges but it's getting too hot. And you look at the wires in there and there's silver exposed or something like that underneath the insulation. Don't operate that bike. There's problems there. You need, as we like to jokingly say, it needs professional help. Check the battery for damage. Any kind of cracks on that battery is a sign to not use the bike. So if that battery casing has physical cracks in it, don't use it. Simply just don't use it. Take it and get it something. And then the other one that's interesting that we find that because the way these e-bikes are built is the brake functions. And I'll tell a little story here in a second on the end of this slide about an episode that we dealt with. But the brakes on e-bikes typically have a cutoff switch, and they trigger around the 10% point. 10% pressure on the brake usually turns the switch and cuts the circuit to the motor. So there's two things you got to do to check the bike before you ride. One is to make sure that the motor shuts off its function when you apply either one of the brakes. The other is to make sure that the bike can't move. And so at the halfway point on your brakes, the bike or the trike you shouldn't be able to roll it without really pushing against it. And that's really kind of important as a simple check, because if while you're standing there in a brand new ride, getting ready to go outdoors, and you squeeze the brakes down and you can move the bike, that's not going to stop you when you need it to in an emergency situation. Because if you have to squeeze all the way down and the brake levers are touching the handlebars or they're touching the grips, then there's not enough leverage against that, and you need to get the brakes adjusted or get the pads checked or what have you. And particularly a lot of these direct-to-consumer bikes that we're seeing out there, they're not usually set up very well at the beginning, and at this point, once you notice that, you need to have them checked out or do it yourself if you're mechanically aptitude. So let's talk about the one case here that was really important about this, because it has two things to it. This was a case we were involved in very, very deeply. It was an insurance claim. We went through courtroom process with it as both a forensics and an expert. The operator of this bike is 15 years old, and on YouTube found a way to move the pedal assist sensor, the PAS, which is the little Hall effect sensor that goes around the bottom bracket, and there's a magnet that spins around that tells it when you're pedaling. Well, he thought of a clever way to do this is to take this and move it to the front wheel. So now whenever his front wheel spun, his bike would go. And he had a cruise control basically at that point. You didn't have to hold the throttle down. You didn't do anything. The front wheel spins off, the bike goes at 28 miles an hour. And so down the road, he's got this bike, doesn't have to pedal, doesn't have to do anything. The fact that the bike's in motion is good. In that same YouTube video, they never really explained about the brake cutoff. So in this situation, when he was rewiring his bike, he couldn't get all the wiring to fit because the harnesses were, but he found that if he just unplugged the brakes, the bike would work. So he unplugged the brakes. And so now he's got the bike. The brakes, when he squeezes the handlebars brakes, the bike stops because there's enough enough force on the brakes to stop the bike, eventually stop the wheel from rolling, and that stopped the motor until it didn't. And until he squeezed down and it didn't stop. And then bad things happened, and that's how we got involved in it. So check this stuff out. Make sure that you check your brakes and check the wiring. If you see any silver parts of the wire underneath the insulation, don't ride the bike. Get somebody to help you if you don't know how to fix this. Lastly, in the same operational thing, if you notice an odor coming from your bike or you hear it hissing, stop using it. Something's gone wrong with the battery or the controller. You don't want to mess around with this. Remember, there's a bunch of M80s in that battery pack. So give it some time, figure out what's going on, and don't operate it. So now, when you park your bike, don't park it in direct sunlight. In some parts of the world, this may not matter as much. Down here in Texas, we get real sunlight, and it gets hot. And so we've seen these things not necessarily catch fire, but we've seen them blow their internal fuses when they're just sitting there because they're in the direct sunlight. And then, again, just like before, don't put it in front of an entrance or an exit where it's blocking anything, because if it does catch fire, it's blocked your way out. And then don't store it anywhere flammable. What we have put forward, was put forward is something for e-bikes and dealers and distributors. This includes Recumbent dealers as well, is that everybody should be educating consumers about the use of their e-bikes. We just went through a process of that today. But this should be something that the bike company that sold you your bike talks to you about, should be in their manuals. This is our opinion, but we think they should be in the manuals. Your staff should know about it. They should know about the laws and regulations. We've talked in another episode of Laid Back Bike Report a lot about the regulations. Don't attempt to solder e-bike wiring harnesses. Use the replacement harnesses. You wouldn't solder a brake cable. Well, some of us would, but don't, as a general rule, don't do this. Don't attempt to repair damaged batteries. Again, this, if you go back to that list of things, if you look in the 24 fires that occurred this year, or last year, more than half were related to people messing around with their batteries. So keep that in mind. These things are not as straightforward as the old golf carts were. And messing around with these little bitty batteries that have so much energy in them is a recipe for failure. And as a shop, we recommended to the industry that they discourage modifications and have a very clear policy. We won't reservice juiced or modified e-bikes at all. So, if, now we're well known, my company is well known for servicing any e-bike that walks through the door, but we draw the line at bikes that have been modified or, as they say in the e-bike forums, juiced, meaning they're set up to go much faster or use much more energy than the traditional bike would have had they just bought it off the shelf. And then for manufacturers, we've asked the industry that they consider some additional safety features. This first one is the most important one, is that there should be some kind of light detection inside the BMS. Now, again, these are opinions, so don't run off and say, oh, we want to go buy this. These are what we think because of what we've seen. Now, that's not something the industry is going to run off and do. It's going to take you as a buyer to say, hey, I'd like to see this too. But we think light detection makes a lot of sense, so that if a bike's cell is cracked or there's internal heating and it lights up inside, because believe me, there's a lot of light and a lot of heat when these things go off, then the system would shut down current, just like a fuse. We also think there should be mechanical timers, and so we recommend mechanical timers to our customers. We think everybody should consider this, just because it's an easy, simple solution. You can prevent overcharging really easily by putting a mechanical timer in the charging circuit. $10 on Amazon, wind the thing up, put it in, and walk away. Don't trust it, but have it trust you, so that if you're not there, you're playing with the kids, you're watching TV or whatever, you don't forget to unplug the thing at the end of the charge cycle. And it's just a safety thing that's really cheap and easy to do. And then again, for the more expensive, provide some feedbacks to the charger. Today, most charging circuits are one or two wires. They're power in. When the back current gets to a certain point, the red light turns from red to green, and it goes into trickle charge mode. So that's a minimum amount of feedback. But if the BMS could talk to the charger, it could do more. It could say this pack is, and again, there's multiple pack, 6 or 7 of these things in each battery. They could say, hey, look, this pack is discharging more than these others. Maybe we need to put a threshold in here and say, look, sorry, consumer, there's something going on with your pack. You need to take it to a service center. So we think there could be some things that could be improved here, and is what we have recommended at this. And then lastly, there are standards for safety out there that are very, very good. And there are standards for safety that are at least reasonable. So the ISO standard of 4210-220 is an incredibly good standard that's kind of a European standard. It doesn't work quite right in the U.S. market because of the speeds and other things that are involved in it. But it's a really good starting point, and a little sanding, it could be made very user-friendly for the U.S. But if you buy a bike that meets that standard, then it's probably the best standard out there. Underwriters Laboratories has come out with UL 2849. I'm very familiar with it. It's also a good start. It's not as good as TS 4210, but it's a very good standard for e-bikes. And so some of the consumer branded bikes that you're getting in the U.S. now come with a 2849 certification, and that's a really good sign. So the systems that are out there, say 2839, you can actually go to the UL website and look them up and see if the manufacturer's there. But a lot of our conversion systems like the Bafangs and what have you are starting to get UL 28 to 49 certifications. So that's a good move. The whole industry is going in this direction, and they're all thinking about safety and consumer products and how they relate. And then lastly, the CPSC 1512. Every bike in the U.S. is supposed to be 1512 manufactured to that spec. 1512 was written in 1973. So it's today you would consider it kind of the bare minimum of a bicycle safety standard that you could meet. And so if you go into a bike shop or go into and look, every bike sold in the U.S. is going to meet this 1512 standard, but it is out of date, and the industry is working, toward trying to update that. And some combination of 4210, 2849, and 1512 is going to emerge from all of this work, because it's, I sat through two meetings this past week on these subject, one with the CPSC and one with some bicycle dealers, and then next week I'm sitting through two more meetings on this, and then I've got some court work to do on another one that's come in. So all of this together combined, and my little tiny itsy bitsy piece of the ecosystem is getting involved so much, means that everybody's getting involved. So we're all very aware as an industry about these things and are working toward a common goal of safe, user-friendly e-bikes, e-trikes, and other mobilities devices. And from that's my update on e-bikes, e-bike safety, and where things are at today. And we will go back to the show and talk some more.
All right. Great practical advice as advertised, Doug. Thank you. Let me, we've got quite a bit of response already on some of these. So if you wouldn't mind answering a few direct questions here. Before the show, I got a Facebook message from John Johnson, who asks, recently I was on a vacation in Oxford, Mississippi, riding up a slope on the Ole Miss Golf entrance, and rode up about 10 miles and about 10 miles into our ride with the Tongsheng full battery. I had it in assist level 1, granny, on the 8-speed Nexus rear hub and a 20-inch wheel. And this motor has about 4,000 miles on it. All of a sudden, it became hard to pedal up the slope. Looking at the display, it was blank. Turned it on and off, no avail. Finished the ride without assist. That night in the hotel, I put the battery on the charger, even though it still had plenty of charge left. Then before the next ride, I turned it on in the hotel, and it stayed on. I went riding, no problem since then. What do you think happened to cause this? Could it be the connection of the battery? And I'd never thought to check the battery's charge indicator lights, he says. So, Doug, what are your thoughts on what might have happened?
Tongshengs have a thermal fuse a thermal sensor in them. Most of them do. So what he describes sounds like it triggered, and that basically shuts the power down to the motor. And it's potted in there. It takes a really long time to cool off before they'll reset. So the first guess would be that it was probably related to the thermal sensor. A second guess could be something that opened up in the motor that is closed up, but that would reoccur eventually. So I would tend to lean toward the first guess. Depending on where he got the motor and which head unit it's got, he might actually be able to go in the programming mode and look and see if it's got a thermal sensor and what the settings are. The Tongshen motors, like the EcoCycle cells, have that ability. And they actually sell a cooling mod for that particular motor too, which is a different shell with some aluminum heat sink on it that tends to mitigate the overheating issue on long climbs.
Good. All right, we got a question from Glenn Aldridge. This is kind of a future forward-looking question. So there's new batteries you hear talked about all the time for either EVs or possibly maybe we can use them here. Blade batteries, solid-state salt batteries. Just quickly, Doug, because it's a little bit off of what we need to talk about here. Anything you know about that's coming down the pike that might supplant the lithium-ion batteries?
Honestly, this is out of my wheelhouse, no pun intended. I read the same things that obviously Glenn has read, but I don't know of anybody heading down those roads, so to speak, for e-assist. What I do know is the battery packages and packaging themselves are getting more dense, so the chemical composition of the cells are changing over time. There are a new set of cells coming out that are about 30% more dense than the current cells. Those are in the market in some places now. In fact, I just saw one the other day at the coming from the that's going to officially be introduced to the Shanghai Bike Show here in a couple of months, where they're bringing the standard what they call dolphin style battery up to about the mid 20s in the amp hour range. So that's quite a bit of improvement since they're typically about 16. That's good news and bad news. Good news is you get more endurance out of your battery. The bad news is you've got more energy there that you got to deal with some of the issues we've just talked about.
Right, right. All right. Here's someone who's been on the show before, Paul Kilgore. Hello, Paul. He was on the show back in September from the Paralyzed Veterans of America. Talked about a race there, but within that segment, he talked about a horrible battery fire that occurred. I'm guessing this is the one he's talking about here, Crested Butte. A hand cycle that had been left in that building and not plugged into a charger wall. So I guess the question is, and I think you covered this fairly well already, so the charger is the number one thing that could be the problem, but there are other reasons, damage and such. We can't speculate. I don't know if they came up with a reason for that fire, but what do you have to say about that, Doug?
Yeah, I know what he's talking about. I don't honestly know off the top of my head if they've completely forensically examined it and came up to a conclusion. A lot of times there's not much left to figure it out, so you've got to somewhat go with an educated guess. But yes, the charger's the typical one. You see that a lot, particularly a lot of the later New York fires. A lot of the issues where people are modifying or changing or fixing in quotes e-bike batteries and those catch fire. That's the majority of the cases we know. But that's not certainly the only case. There are lots of ways these things can fail, both internally due to physical or chemical damage, or just wear, life cycle issues in the cells, all the way down. I mean, there's just a lot of things that could go on. And in this particular case, it wasn't on the charger, but something caused it to catch fire. And there's a couple of these. There's a famous one in China where a whole row of bikes went up that were just sitting still. And the best guess they had with that one was that one of the cell packs had been involved in an impact accident. And but it was speculation because by the time they could clean it all up, it was all charred ruins.
Yeah, there's not much left in the way of clues after something like that. All right, what about just keeping the charging or the batteries outdoors if that's a possibility? Is that a good practice in general?
So that is one of the things people have recommended in this industry. I don't know that outdoors is necessarily an ideal situation because of all the dynamics that can go on, but certainly away from everything flammable, away from things that could catch fire. I know one of our customers was like, "Well, mine, I'm just fine. My battery's over here in the garage." And I said, "Do you park your car and your lawnmower in here?" "Well, of course." I said, "Well, there's something that catches fire. So perhaps maybe you want to move it somewhere else." And then the other problem with the garage, other things, is you get chemicals. The most famous issue that you have is people are keeping their pool chemicals next to the bikes, and those can cause issues. So it's really, my opinion, it's best just to keep them somewhere where it's reasonably environmentally controlled and away from moisture and away from other chemicals, and certainly away from something flammable, which may be a garage or place, but not necessarily, in the bedroom. So, a lot of times people are like, "Oh, let's put it in my bedroom." It's like, no, put it somewhere just away from things.
All right, thanks for the question, Sean. Let's go rapid fire here. You can probably do these pretty quickly. Bill Chinette, any issues with riding the e-assist in the rain?
As long as it's built properly, no. The most of the connectors are IP67s. Most of the batteries are at least that. So the e-assist in the rain problems only typically occur when there's damage or wear or something like that. So no, not usually as built.
All right. Dennis wants to know, do you have a recommendation for that mechanical charger that you were talking about specifically?
Not really. Like I said, we go on Amazon. You can get these things. We used, used to use them as Christmas tree lights from you were kids. But you've got lots of different things. You've got darkroom timers. You've got mechanical wind-up timers that are there. They're cheap, inexpensive solutions to this problem.
All right. And lastly, Liz, who is in your neighborhood there, wants to know about when to charge in terms of battery life. Like you run it down to 1 or 2 bars. Is it okay to charge them when they're almost full? Any recommendations there?
So typically, this is not. We all have the wives' tale of the NiCad packs from the old days where they had lifespans and things like that. So we don't really have this in these lithium-ion batteries quite the same, at least. What we basically tell people is to charge it up after every ride and leave it. So if you ride, and then that's, if you ride 5 minutes, it's not the same thing. But if you ride your hour and a half ride, get home, charge it up, turn it off, leave it, and then take off from there. They do lose power over time, but not a lot. So you can leave them sitting fully charged for weeks at a time without any issue. But you don't need to run them all the way down and then run them all the way back. That's not doing anything any good other than giving you endurance anxiety.
Very good. All right, guys. I think we're going to leave it there. We've got a bunch of questions continue on, but we'll try to address them. And Doug actually hopefully can get on the chat and maybe answer some of those in live chat for you guys. Thank you so much for all those great questions. Let's move on with this same subject, but slightly different direction. We have a couple of special guests with us that we recorded earlier, talking about a different angle of this regulation and also some insurance issues. We've had quite a few questions on that already in the live chat, which I think many of these will be answered in this next segment. So Jay Townley and Steve Hansen are here to help us with those. Larry, let's hear what they have to say. All right, guys, we are here with 3 prominent figures to talk to you more about e-assist, batteries, legislation, regulation, and legal aspects of all this. With us right now is Jay Townley and Steve Hansen, as well as Doug Davis. And Doug, you guys know well. You just saw him. But let's start maybe with Jay. Jay, could you give us a little background on yourself as regards bikes and recumbents?
I would like to, in the sense that I started working in a bike shop in 1957 for Hazel Park Cycle Center in St. Paul, Minnesota, and worked through junior high school, and a couple of years of college before getting married and getting a job with the Schwinn Bicycle Company. Now, there's a story about how the folks at Hazel Park helped me with that. But you guys that are out there in the audience know them as the Park Tool Company, which they evolved into after I left them. Shows how smart they were. I worked for Schwinn from 1966. So I started the first of the year. Moved from the Twin Cities in a couple of days, and was with them for 24 years. I worked in a number of areas: marketing, dealer development programs, product safety and governmental affairs. I was a registered lobbyist for Schwinn at the federal level, also in a number of states, and went on to work in the operations side of the business, and was involved in moving Schwinn out of its domestic operations to offshore sourcing, at that time with Giant in Taiwan, and ended up, because I was the only one who knew where everything was, I ended up as vice president purchasing and logistics for the last 7 years that I was with Schwinn. My recumbent experience actually started with Frank Berlando, the vice president engineering for Schwinn, who was very involved in a number of different types of recumbency. But as far as my own personal recumbent, I have a Ryan Vanguard. I've ridden the bike that Dick Ryan made for me since about 93 or 94. After I left Schwinn in 1990, one of the things that my family did is we started a bicycle touring company here in Wisconsin. And riding the Vanguard was part and parcel of not only leading tours, but also in exploring more of the road systems to map them out for our touring company, and got very interested in recumbency at that point, and started to follow it in much more detail as a part of my consulting business. And when I partnered with Elliot Gluskin, we made sure that we were following recumbents as a part of what we were doing in our consumer research. So I've been in and out of the recumbent business, but part of what I wanted to do with stats is make sure that the industry was aware of recumbency, who the recumbent brands were in the market and what their volume was and their interest is, and how consumers have gravitated to them.
Sounds good. And I'm going to ask you a few questions right around that particular item. And Jay, I think I actually met you at a Recumbent CycleCon a number of years ago. And that's how I found out about you. And it's great to have you on. It's an honor to have you on as well. So, all right, let's hop out to a little bit warmer area. California, I think, is where Steve Hansen is. Steve, tell us a little bit about your biking and any recumbent connections.
I started practicing law and started riding in 1986 as an adult, started riding. I started doing a lot of, foreign trips to Europe, rode along with the Tour de France, Giro d'Italia, Tour de Suisse, all that type of stuff, multiple times. As I started doing more riding, I got more involved in the legal aspects of it and started representing various entities in the bicycle business, mostly from the supply side, so manufacturers and distributors. I don't have that much direct involvement in recumbents. I don't work with a recumbent bicycle brand, but I may have a brand or two that does recumbents, but it's not primarily a recumbent company.
But you can add to your resume that you have been on the Laid Back Bike Report previously. Yeah, so recumbent reference as well.
Yeah, if anybody wants to know all the minutia of my background, they can just go to my website and look at my profile, and it's pretty much everything is there.
Jay, you mentioned in your background about the stats, the numbers as far as sales and all that stuff. That's really what you focus on. And I know our audience would be interested in knowing about recumbent sales, e-assist sales. What can you give us right now to tell us where the market is? What percentages are recumbent, if you can, and the numbers?
Well, and one of the things that we found in looking at recumbency over the past decade is we call it the niche that graduated and became a legitimate category in the business. Cat trike, you're well aware, is at the top of the high end of our business, or of the adult tri business. Terratrike fits in the middle, and then you got Sun down at the bottom, if you will, if you want to put them in categories. But that means that recumbents are available across the groups of consumers, the demographics of the American bicycle business, and in saying this is the niche that graduated. We were looking at recumbents at a point when those three brands started to grow in percentages when we were able to latch on to surveys of dealers. And this would be pre-2000, actually pre-2019, when we were looking at the percentages of brands that were being carried in particularly bike shops. So the recumbent brands, and if you put them in a basket, there's 10 to 15 that repeat across the country when you survey dealers, are ranging from 10 to 12% of what dealers would stock in the way of brands in a given season. And relative to sales, as to what we're able to get from the consumer. And when I say at this point, get the data, a lot of this has changed since 2019 in the sense that there has not been another survey of dealers done, although I understand the NBDA is really involved in gearing up to do that this year again, which will be great because that'll be the first one in 5 years, where we can look at where recumbency sits from the standpoint of specialty retail. But from a consumer standpoint, you're talking about a greater than 5% share. And in the case of recumbency, going between 7 and 12% consumer share of market. Within that are really dedicated riders, as you're well aware. The recumbent rider is riding a recumbent for very specific reasons, and they range across the board, but they boil down to a dedication like the certain e-bike riders and certain road riders and certain mountain bike riders, an absolute dedication to recumbency and to recumbent product.
Absolutely. And about the e-assist, from my general conversations with recumbent retailers over the last few years, I've seen that number estimate climbing and climbing. Almost all of them say over 50% of sales now involve the sale of a bike or trike with e-assist. Is that, what do you see nationwide?
Nationwide, I would say that might apply to a cat trike and a like product at the high end. Now, last time I looked, I think I'm still correct in saying that cat trike uses what's called a mid-drive electric motor on the boom. So it's the higher price side of the product range, both for the electric as well as the product itself. When you go to the mid-range, TerraTrike just announced a tadpole at a very reasonable price with a rear hub motor.
Yeah, that's the Charger. Actually, we saw it at CycleCon, right?
Yep, yep. So Charger has been announced as a new entry, and they've got another product above that in their line. So the mid price is well covered, and then Sun again has less. When I look at the line, less electrification. It's all hub, and it's the lower price side of the market. So they're not as aggressive as TerraTrike is, and as Cat Trike has been at the upper end. And I'm sure they're going to shift with the market because the market in e-bikes is coming into the mid to the lower sides of the range. But I think a good way to put it, Gary, is that recumbents have embraced electric assist just like the bike industry has, and it's across all the lines and in all price points across all types.
Very good. Thank you, Jay. All right, guys, let's jump into some definitions to help us get through the rest of this conversation. I'm going to call on Steve to talk a little bit about the regulatory framework. Mostly I'm talking about the organizations that we're going to be talking about and how they work with governmental agencies and such with regulations. So, Steve, if you can, talk to us a little bit about CPSC and UL and ISO and these other things we need to know about. Who are they?
Well, the primary one for bicycles is CPSC, Consumer Product Safety Commission, developed. They came into being in the early 70s. I think it was Nixon that actually put them into play. They're a very small agency, very small, maybe, I don't know, 500 to 700 people there right now. So, I mean, if you look at, the FAA or some other, DOT, they're very small. They have a mandatory standard for bicycles, and then bicycles are defined as, of course, certain types of e-bikes, certain recumbents, certain trikes. I mean, it's the definitional part is kind of tricky. It's a mandatory standard, which creates somewhat of a problem because it's sort of it's an old 1974, 1975 standard. So it's kind of old. A lot of the bike technology has gone past it. ISO, since it's a voluntary standard organization, international standards organization, it's sort of eclipsed a lot of the bicycle standards. So a lot of the mainline brands, Specialized Trek, whatnot, their sole focus is complying with ISO. And by doing so, they're going to, comply with CPSC, which is mandatory. all of the other standards organizations other than CPSC, which is not a standards organization, it's a government entity, NHTSA, which does mopeds and, vehicles that are going to go over 20, they're mandatory. If they have a standard, it's mandatory. They can borrow and sort of enforce voluntary standards. And there's a lot of voluntary standards out there. ASTM's got a good group of standards for bicycles. ISO does, of course. And now we have UL sort of poking into the mobility market. And the problem that UL has is UL doesn't have a background really in bicycles. They have a background in electrical appliances that you plug into the home, which is what most people do with their e-mobility devices. So that's sort of where UL is coming from, and UL is well respected in the insurance industry. They're well respected in the home building market and whatnot. I mean, everybody looks for UL approval. So that's sort of where things are right now. The big e-bike standards right now that specifically address e-bikes are from the ISO, which is their so-called 4210-10, which talks about primarily that's what European bikes want to meet. And then we have the two UL standards, the 2849 and the 2242, which are being discussed now. And they're fairly recent, 2020, 2021. So they haven't really been talked about much in the e-bike industry, but they're sort of becoming the thing that everyone's talking about now because of the e-bike fires. So that's sort of the lay of the land right now as far as what's regulating what. And when it comes to recumbents, I've had this discussion with Doug. The way the Consumer Product Safety Commission defines a bicycle that is subject to their regulation under 1512 is sort of a hit and miss process because it leaves out a number of categories of bikes, that we consider bikes, like four-wheel bikes, etc. And so that's kind of a problem. It's sort of an oversight, I guess you will, for many years with the CPSC. And I think now that we're addressing e-bikes, we should probably address e-bikes and human-powered bikes in all the categories so that we've got the CPSC regulating pretty much everything. The problem is going to be the problem if you do that is again, the Band-Aid solution is taking the 1975 CPSC bicycle standard and trying to apply it to everything that's in the market right now. That's both e-mobility under e-bike under 20 and human powered, bike. It's hard to do that right now.
Right. And we kind of went into this territory on our previous show about the law and recumbents, but this is more of an update about the e-assist. So it does, of course, carry over, as you said, Steve. Is there something you wanted to specifically get in here, Doug?
Well, I mean, the main thing that I wanted to touch on that point was that, and this is a consumer issue, is that none of these standards today, except for the CPSC 1512, are law. All these other things are voluntary or compliance related in the sense that people can attest to them and things like that. So there's nothing out there that's written down that says you must be UL certified 2849 e-bike. There's nothing like that out there. So this is an industry compliance issue, and this means a lot to guys that are in the business, but it also means a lot to the consumer because consumers have this tendency to believe they're protected by some of this stuff. And as we're going to talk, Steve and Jay are going to talk to later on, you are kind of, but not really protected.
So we're going to talk about operating and storage of e-bikes and e-bike systems. And Steve, I guess what I want to start off with, people want to know about insurance. So we talked a bit about this on the last time you were on the show, but how does all this regulation and liability affect the insurance aspects as a e-bike owner?
Okay, so I'm going to direct my discussion to owners of e-assist vehicles, not the people that are selling them as a business.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an owner of an e-bike, some e-mobility device, recumbent or otherwise, you can have liability for something that it does. So if it runs over somebody and you're, driving it or riding it, obviously you've got a negligence issue. If you burn up your own house with your e-bike in charging it, the question is, okay, is your insurance company going to rebuild your house even though you were charging an e-bike in the garage, which isn't covered under their policy? So the question becomes then, things can get kind of weird with coverage, because there's coverage for the e-bike being used, and then there's coverage for what the e-bike does when it's sitting in your garage. So they might cover the house fire if the e-bike caused the house fire while it was charging, but neither policy, an auto policy or renter's policy or homeowner's policy, would not likely cover you for some motorized device if you run over someone's dog or run into someone else, or cause damage to a vehicle or something like that. So the coverage stuff is extremely complicated right now, because it involves what I call sort of a first party coverage, which is something done to your own property, like your house burning down. And then there's a liability coverage for something that you do with the e-bike that causes damage to somebody else that you can get sued for. All of these questions pretty much have to be referred to your insurance broker, who's providing you with these different coverages. And then you have to ask them, look, this is the thing I have. I have this thing and this thing and this thing in my garage that I use. Which of these things am I covered for if I run over someone with them? And what am I covered for if, I burn my own house down? Of course, a more complicated question is, what happens if you take your bike over to your friend's house and charge it, or you do something over there and you burn his house down? Now that becomes a liability issue. It's not a first party issue. There's lots and lots of uncertainty now with e-mobility devices in the insurance industry, because the insurance industry has not yet figured it out, because the bike industry really hasn't figured out what these things are, or how they're regulated. So
this is what it came down to, even in our previous discussion that you were with us for. And I remember your advice there was, it's too crazy. You got to ask your insurance agent, and you got to ask specific questions, and that's the best advice. Let's, if we could, Steve, you had made a point to me earlier about the speeds involved with some of these e-bikes with regard to the CPSC and NHTB. Is that how it affects the insurance? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think again, the problem is how insurance companies view the landscape of what it is that they're insuring. So if they wanted to go with state law, a lot of states have implemented the People for Bikes 3-class law. So you have class 1, class 2, which go up to 20. And then you have the class 3 issue, which goes 28 with some pedal assist. And I can see the insurance industry trying to, live within that. But I've also seen questions of insurance coverage on stuff that goes over 20 because the CPC regulation says, up to 20. So they're saying, well, we're not going to cover anything that goes over 20. I've also seen situations where insurance companies say, well, we don't care how fast it goes. It's motorized. So we're not going to cover it as a bicycle because it's motorized. And we can do what we want as to what we're going to cover or not cover because we control how we define things in our own policy. We don't care about how state law or the CPSC defines a bicycle. That's not our issue. Our issue is we define our own policy, we sell you the policy, and then we determine what is a bicycle, and we do not feel that a bicycle is something with a battery on it for power. So some insurance companies have taken that position.
Right. It remains confusing, obviously. So, all right. Well, that's what we're trying to sort out here. All right, Jay. I was reading through your latest newsletter, and you talked about something called de minimis, and this
that's not arcane at all.
No. Well, you know what? I know that is. That sounds like something I told you guys not to talk about on this show. But I think
you told us about this earlier.
Stay with me. I'm going to try to bring this to some sort of useful thing here for our viewers. So the questions I want to ask have to do with like modifications to bikes and trikes, because as Doug has talked about previously here, you can buy a whole system, buy the cat trike with the mid-drive, and there off you go. And that's the kind of thing that Steve was just talking about. However it falls, the insurance companies are going to have to deal with it one way or the other. What about if you buy a component and add it to your current bike, or you have some sort of associated conversion? You're doing your own e-assist kind of thing. And the de minimis, I think, actually has to do with what you can buy overseas. So instead of me jumping out here, not knowing what I'm talking about, Jay, if you could start out, tell us, as far as our viewers are concerned, what is de minimis and how does that affect the consumer?
Well, if our consumers out there have bought anything direct from a brand manufacturer retailer, primarily in China, and this is a big deal in the fashion business. I talk to my granddaughters all the time about these packages they get from Amazon and from with strange Chinese writing on them coming direct from mainland China. Going back a few years, the Congress, in its infinite wisdom, passed a law that allows an American citizen to buy from any foreign country products that are valued at $800 U.S. currency and at FOB. That would be at the free on board or at the retail price of the product leaving the factory. And it allows for you to buy dresses, umbrellas, e-bikes, batteries, parts for your car, you name it. If the declared value, it doesn't say you can't cheat. If the declared value is US dollars 800 or less in value, it comes into the United States from that foreign country directly to you as a U.S. citizen to your home address, delivered by the conventional sources, U.S. Post Office, UPS, FedEx, et al., for the cost of the transportation, duty-free, tax-free. It's not inspected. It's not looked at. It's in no way, shape, or form interrupted or stopped. It goes directly from the source in mainland China or India to your home. So you are the importer, but the law, and this de minimis comes from that portion of the customs law that was changed by Congress to allow this value. Now, historically, this started out in the 20s. De minimis was $1. And then it slowly worked its way up. Right now, it's at $800 because the folks that wrote the law said that this is good for consumers because they can buy directly from these catalog sources to the consumer. They can buy fashions, they can buy anything they want, and it satisfies the need of the American consumer for these products. So to your point, Gary, I could buy a battery. Now, batteries, if you want to replace a battery for an e-bike in the U.S. system, you go buy a Bosch, which is a name brand battery, or a Shimano name brand battery. I can name others. You're talking somewhere north of $800, thereabouts. You want to buy one directly on the internet? I think, Steve, you mentioned you may have looked recently. I know I have. I can get one for under $100.
Right. So, of course, this then is going to bring up the question. I just bought a battery for my trike because I needed a second one or replace the first one. Something happened to that battery. Doug talked about earlier. It had a crack in it. I'm getting rid of it. It's not safe. I'm going to buy one for $100 and I don't have to worry about it. What's wrong with that?
Well, nothing from the standpoint of the transaction. The U.S. law says you could do that. The problem that you run into is how safe is that product? Will that product, lithium ion, let's put it into relative terms. I have a partner who is a graduate engineer. And if you take a typical battery pack for an e-bike, there are cells in it. There are 20 cells. Each one of those cells has the energy stored in it equivalent to a quarter stick of dynamite. I'll let that sink in. So if there's 20 of them in a battery pack, that's 5 sticks of dynamite from an energy standpoint. Now you get to how well will that battery manage that energy. And there are battery packs you can buy from Bosch, back to the name brands, that are highest quality. They manage that energy extremely well, as long as you follow their instructions for charging and the care and feeding of that battery. These low-cost batteries have a much higher probability of actually a fire. Getting one of these cells to pop off, from the standpoint of the effect it has, it's devastating because when one of these goes, the fumes are toxic, highly toxic. I mean, if one of them starts, you want to get out of the way, out of the room. Fire departments today don't allow their firefighters to put out a lithium-ion battery fire unless they wear full masks. They understand that they're very hot. You cannot put them out with water. So you're dealing with a hazard. And the lower the price of the battery, the higher the hazard to the individual using that battery.
Okay, so I get that, but what do I have to worry about? As long as nobody gets hurt, Amazon's responsible for that. They're the ones that sold it to me, right?
Well, that's a question for learned counsel.
Well, look, we happen to have a learned counsel here. Who would you like to weigh in on that, Steve?
Yeah, the Amazon thing is so complex right now with respect to liability for Amazon. There's probably 50 cases in 50 states that have come down different ways on Amazon's liability for selling, some product from China, which is, where they get 90% of their stuff, as to whether or not you can sue Amazon or you have to sue the Chinese company. It's not very clear, and a lot of it has to do with how it was that the product got listed on Amazon. If they're a third-party seller, if it was sold by Amazon, there are many different ways that Amazon can put a product up on its website for sale. The other important thing to remember for the consumer is if you go buy a bike that has a Bosch system and you're like, this is great, and then 2 years later you're like, oh, I need to get another battery. And then you've got the J situation. You're like, I'm not going to buy an $800 battery. I'm going to go buy the $100 battery, which the Chinese told me is fully compatible with the Bosch system, which it kind of is totally compatible with the Bosch system. They have just failed to mention that it doesn't have all the same safety features, but it'll still plug in. So you plug that in and then your garage burns down. And then things happen and your insurance company says, well, we're going to pay for your house that got burned down. We're going to go ahead and cover that. They're a great insurance company. They're going to go ahead and cover it. But then they're going to turn around and say, well, now we can sue Bosch because of this bad e-bike. And then we find out when we get into it that guess what? That battery case, if there's still some fragments left of it, didn't come from Bosch. They came from China. So now what? Well, that means your insurance company no longer collects from Bosch, and and you're left hanging. So
let's actually put a finer point on the purchase from China. Let's say many people I know now are buying directly from China, and Doug in the past has talked about this IOR, importer of record thingy. What is that? How does that affect my liability? Doug, do you want to talk about that?
I can. I'm not the learned counsel here, but I certainly understand this. So when you import something, particularly that's outside of this range, or otherwise you just go onto AliExpress and say, "Send me a battery." You become the importer for this, whatever this is you buy, whether it's a battery or toothbrush or whatever it is, and that. Under U.S. law, unless they have a nexus inside of the U.S. for whoever this is, you have effectively become the manufacturer of that product. And from a liability, from a product standpoint, under the code that's out there, and again, Steve's going to cringe a little bit because it's not quite as clear as I'm going to play it out to be. You end up owning this thing for its lifespan on U.S. soil, and that. Maybe bothers people, maybe doesn't, but where you see this kind of stuff play out, not necessarily in the e-bikes because they're still new, but in other things, automotive stuff and things like that. I buy one of these things, import it, put it in, do it, sell the device, sell the vehicle, and the other guy has a problem with it. Well, when it goes through all this pachinko machine of the insurance company and the liability, it runs back to you because you're the guy that imported it. And suddenly you're on the hook for something you really had nothing to do with, other than the fact you clicked twice on AliExpress and paid for it.
Yeah, Steve.
Well, there's a caveat with this. This is where I just mentioned the Bosch system, right? Where you go out and you buy a battery in China and you bring it in. You're the importer, and then you put it in your Bosch, and then your garage burns down. Okay. So that's one situation. Or your Bosch bike burns down a friend's house or something like that. The law, what gets tricky with the law is in many states, if you cannot reach the manufacturer in Asia, the importer or secondary seller or whatever all can stand in the shoes of the manufacturer, meaning that they sort of become the manufacturer for product liability reasons. But the trick to this is many states, even states that are really liberal, like California, which created product liability law in the 60s, there are situations in which the court will not hold the so-called importer of record in on a product liability theory if that person is not a customary seller of these devices. In other words, the person really isn't trying to run a business making money off of selling these batteries. If he brought it in for himself, that's a whole different issue. So you don't have a product liability exposure, but you could still have an exposure for, negligence or whatever. So the product liability thing gets very, very tricky, and it gets really tricky if you're someone bringing these batteries in on a regular basis or in quantity to try to sell them to third parties. That's when problems really crop up.
All right. You guys were all on this Zoom call earlier today that had to do with what the future of regulation may look like here. Jay, if we can, maybe you can lay out for us what the meeting was about and what you thought happened, and then we'll see if we can get any opinions from your colleagues here.
I'll do my best. This was a public meeting asked for or called by people for bikes, but the purpose was to bring some clarification to a document a letter actually that was issued by CPSC about the 19th of December to 2,000 bicycle brands, manufacturers, retailers, wholesalers in the United States, doing two things. It urged all of those people to make sure that the e-bikes that they were selling were meeting the standards, two standards that they referenced. One was UL 2849, which has been mentioned here. The other is UL 2242, which is a battery standard. Now, I will point out UL 2849 is a system standard for e-bikes, for e-bike electric propulsion systems, that includes 2242. So 2849 is inclusive of the battery standard. And essentially what People for Bikes asked for was for the commission to move on urging the industry to adopt and have batteries that are tested and certified to 2242, but opined that UL 2849, which is the complete system standard, was essentially not mature and beyond the ability of the industry to comply at this point. And so that was pushed back by the commission, who basically stood their ground, and as I understood the dialogue, said, no, we would rather see a complete standard, a standard for a complete system for electric propulsion for bicycles than just the battery.
After we look at 100 fires, random e-bike fires, we might come up with 5 top reasons why these fires are occurring. I think and this is speculation, but I think at the end of the day, probably what we're going to find out about is not that the bicycle system had a problem with its OEM charger and its OEM battery, et cetera, even though it wasn't UL approved. What we're probably going to see is a situation where the user did something wrong, using a bad charger, using a battery that was damaged, not knowing, not recognizing that there's a problem. And the question really is 2242 just the minimum UL standard that deals with the battery? The question is that standard going to prevent fires? And if so, how is it going to do that if someone brings in a battery from China? I don't know enough about the difference between those two UL standards to know how are they going to prevent bad consumer activity from causing fires. They're going to make sure that the bike is great when it walks out the door, but if consumers continue bad activity, is that still going to cause fires? And I really think that's what we need to take a look at. Not saying that the UL standards aren't going to help. I'm sure they're going to help. The question is, I'm not sure what's causing these fires or how we can prevent consumers from doing these bad things.
I have no chance of making this segment de minimis in any way, shape, or form, clearly. So I'm going to give you the last word here. Doug, go ahead.
These best practices that we've come up with for e-bikes and batteries and handling, what have you, are an opinion today. As Steve put forward, we simply don't have the science or the statistics today to really say, oh, the reason this thing went up was because it was overcharged or because this happened, what have you. So we need to be very careful and not put too much FUD out there. We don't know what we don't know, but we're smart people with a lot of smart engineers or other people that all see a pervasiveness of the same problems. And that's kind of what these recommendations are going with.
And hopefully we can get to a point where the consumer can find a certain standard, whether it's UL or CPSC or something, a number, an image on a product that they can look at, and finally at some point say, this is okay. This product is likely to be safe. But there is a lot of complication to this issue as people are going to make changes, modifications, additions, and that really leads into some wild, wild west territory, as we have discussed. So I think we're going to leave it there. Gentlemen, thank you so much, Jay Townley, Steve Hansen, and Doug Davis for joining us here. And we'll see if we can continue the discussion on the live show. And there we have our pals, Steve and Jay and Doug. And guys, we've had a lot of interaction. I think most of the questions for this segment, pretty much you guys answered as you went through it. I tried to pop them on the screen as they were asked, and I think that was done well. I think what I want to finish up with is putting this all into a larger context, because we've talked about the dangers. We're talking about fires mostly here. And Doug, you talked about the number of incidents that you saw last year in newspapers. We've all seen that, and it's alarming. But I don't know that we've had many or any fatalities. So not to minimize this at all, but if we could, maybe starting with you, Jay, can you give us an idea, like how much danger do you think there actually is? Keeping in mind that what we've all talked about today was important in terms of making sure that it doesn't get worse. Jay, what do you think about the numbers?
Well, first of all, there have been fatalities,
Okay.
sadly. The New York situation is where you see the fatalities, where you see the larger numbers on a per thousand basis or on an actual basis. When you're asking, from the standpoint of a consumer, is there a danger? It goes to right now the only criterion we have, and that is the lower priced product. And you have to be very careful here because there's a lot of e-bike product that's on sale. It went on sale, for Black Friday and for the run up to Christmas and to the period after Christmas and what we're going through right now in the first month of the new year. But outside of quality brands that have reduced price, you've got the lower priced product. And I think that's the only criterion you can go by for where it gets more dangerous. And this is all law of probability. Doug can speak to this as well, that the higher priced product brings with it a lower probability of an incident. The lower priced product, a higher probability of a problem. And it gets even worse if you're replacing a system tested battery with a non-system tested battery that you buy at a lower price direct from a source outside of the United States under the de minimis rule. So to me, the risk to the consumer and consumer safety is very, very less probable in the higher price product. And it's more probable when you get to the lower price product, and that's where the risk is. And in the case of the city of New York, it's the delivery gig workers there, the folks that are making a living, working extremely hard, 12, 18 hours a day, making delivery for primarily food, but also for other things to consumers.
Very good, Jay. And Steve, let me ask it to you in a little bit different way. So have you seen any legal actions for people that have been harmed or properties that have been harmed by battery fires, or do you know of other lawyers who have been involved in legal actions with these things?
Yeah, I haven't been involved directly in any fire cases, but I do know there are a number going on. The problem is they tend to be sort of quiet about these things. They usually aren't covered in the media. The media will cover a fire, and then 6 months down the road, when a lawsuit's filed by someone versus someone, they don't cover that. It's not known about. It's not of interest to the press. The bicycle retailer people, they try to cover stuff. They were covering the large suit by State Farm against Rad bikes. They had a case going against them regarding a house that burned up, and apparently it's getting ready to settle, according to the latest articles that I've read. Initially, Rad denied the allegations, and now it looks like it's going to settle. I don't know what that really means. I mean, sometimes you have to read between the lines with settlements because you really don't know why cases are settling. But the problem that I see going forward is, I think over time, I think we're going to end up with lower priced e-bikes direct from Asia. I think that's where the market might be going. You'll always have high-priced Bosch systems, Shimano systems. You'll always have quality product. But I think the lower priced product is going to win out because there'll be more of it. And in the United States, everybody likes low priced product. And then you combine that with products don't get better with age. They never do, unlike wine. And then you have people wanting to do tinkering and replacements and messing with products, be that retailers, be it consumers in the garage, whatever. So the replacement battery issue is going to become a bigger issue. And I think overall, we're going to have more of these e-mobility products around for longer periods of time in people's garages. I mean, this is another thing that I'm concerned with about this is that I could see someone saying, well, I'm tired of the e-bike. I don't like riding it anymore. I don't ride with my friends anymore. So I'm just going to throw it in the garage. And I have an e-scooter and I don't ride that anymore because I fell on it once. So I'm going to just put that in the garage. And I'm just going to leave them in there and I'm not going to think about them again. I'll leave them in there for 5 years. And then maybe later I'll do something. I'll plug it in right away after 5 years and I'll see if I can get that thing charged up again or, whatever. I don't think these things are great laying around in the garage. I think that is a recipe for a problem, especially if something goes uncharged for a long period of time and becomes completely dead. And then someone's trying to recharge, or the device is damaged in the garage because it's fallen over 3 or 4 times or has been hit by a vehicle inside the garage or something like that. And some sort of damage occurs. I just think storing things in your garage that aren't used, like these batteries I think it's a recipe for more problems to crop up in the future.
All right.
Garages are safer than 15-story apartment buildings in New York, but not if they're attached to your house or not if you live over your garage or something. You've got the garage underneath the house.
Right.
So I see more of these fires coming because we've already got a lot of product out there, and I don't see the regulatory situation with CPSC and the bicycle industry. I don't see that coming into play for a while.
Right.
So I don't see new product getting fixed going out the door right now. And then of course, the discount sellers in China, they're not going to be interested in complying with any regulations until they're somehow clamped down on at the harbor.
Right. Really good points, Steve. And both the longevity of the products that we use and that being a long-term danger, and also the issues that we talked about throughout the report here, as far as what needs to be done is some sort of regulatory balanced level playing field that everyone can live up to, and that makes us all safe, which seems to be quite a ways away from what we talked about. Doug, so I'm going to give you the last word here. You messaged me there with some details on the numbers from New York. What did you have there?
Well, in 2022 statistics, there were 9 fatalities and 94 injuries that they have directly related to an e-bike fire. So there have been fatalities, as we've talked about earlier. Most of these, and Jay, you may know more. I think all the ones I've read about have always been people modifying or otherwise, doing their own self-manufacturing, self-repair on these batteries. And the best thing I could do is caution anybody undertaking that they're not your golf cart battery. These things are immensely more powerful from an energy density standpoint. And I wouldn't go so far to say you need special training or all that kind of stuff, but there's a whole different process of testing and safety and what have you that you need to undertake to repair these things. And then to echo what Steve just said, there's no way that price alone can tell you whether the battery's safe or not. But it does change the probability, particularly the brands that are more sold in the European area where there is higher and more technical standards for safety than we have in the US. Those tend to be the Bosch and the Shimano's and the other name brands. And so we need to be very, very careful with this. And Gert, you're flashing something like that up there.
Right. I wanted to bring Glenn's point up here. It's legitimate, and he takes exception to just the
Yeah, and I would
and I think we're talking about that, Glenn. It's a fair point. Go ahead, Doug. Finish up.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with him either. The issue, but I don't, he's made a statement about Tesla fires and e-bikes. I don't have statistics to dispute or prove that out, and some of the other guys might, but people aren't modifying their Tesla batteries in the garage.
And that's what Glenn said. Glenn did talk about it's more likely to be people messing with them. Go ahead, Steve.
One of the problems that we've got, and I mean, I've got to bring this up to CPSC and the people in the bicycle industry, the trade groups. We don't have enough information about the fires that have occurred. And the problem is the media goes and covers it and says, well, here's an e-bike, drag it out, it's all burned. Okay, it must have done something. We don't have any forensics. We don't have anything happening at all. The media is not interested in forensics. That's 6-8 months down the road with each of these fires. And so we don't know really, what triggered the fire. I mean, was it damage to the battery? Was it a replacement battery? Was it something wrong with the electrical system of the house? Was it something with the charger? As Doug knows, there's 20 things that can go wrong, and we just don't know what's going wrong, other than the fact that the media says, here's an e-bike, here's a fire, put the two together, obviously there's something wrong.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
and the media doesn't get it right because they have a lot of non-pedal vehicles that they call e-bike fires.
Well, let me point out that the fire department of New York does have, as Doug will attest, one of these fires doesn't leave forensics evidence. The forensic evidence is burned. But the fire department of New York has done enough work to give us clues. It's not as black and white, I think, as Steve says it is. However, I agree, it is very gray. The gentleman that's commenting about, well, he disputes the fact that it's lower priced. We're not dealing with cars. As Doug will tell you, there's how many more cells in a Tesla car than there is in a bike? Doug, I mean, it's
a lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
You're dealing with a different platform. You're also, at this particular point, you are not going to get a Tesla into the United States under the de minimis rule. It just ain't going to happen. You're going to get e-bikes and you're going to get batteries into the United States under the de minimis rule. There's 2 million transactions or packages coming into this country every day, documented by the Congress. 2 million per day under the de minimis rule. So you begin to look at evidentiary material and the lower priced scenario, and we're seeing it playing out in a primary market like New York, where the fire department of New York does have some information and data. Not enough, but that's all we've got to work with at this point. So I think to just throw it off on, gee, it's the guys that are putting in do it yourself, or the guys that are putting in just the replacement battery. It's not the whole picture, but we've got to be, I think, very mindful of the lower priced product coming into the country under this de minimis rule, and what do we do about that? To Steve's point, how does 2849 deal with that? How do we build the confidence to do the education? How do we make sure the consumer is aware? One of the things, by the way, that people from Bike said in that meeting last week with CPSC is they want to move to make e-bikes and e-bike batteries exempt from the de minimis rule. Just as liquor is. I made a mistake in my statement that you can buy anything. You can't. Liquor is exempt. You can't buy booze. However, you could add e-bikes and e-bike batteries to the list. Let the Congress fight out the amount, and at the same time get e-bikes out from under the de minimis rule, so it's not on those 2 million packages per day, and it gives more weight to what 2849 and companies complying with it will mean in the marketplace.
All right. We're going to have to.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
I'm going to
Steve.
make one. I'm going to make one
Finish it
more
up.
small point, but you know,
All right.
to what they've basically said. Look, how many iPhone fires have we seen? You know, how many Apple computer fires have we seen, which have lithium-ion batteries, right? And there's billions of those devices out there. Not a lot. Why is that? Is it quality control? Is it battery management systems? Is it the use case for the devices? Vapes, vape pens, battery-powered vape devices. Seen quite a few of those fires.
Well, be careful of comparing apples to oranges here.
I understand, but I again, it goes to this issue of price, quality, you know, that and like you said, it's the use case also. We have to look at that. What are the
all right,
devices
gentlemen,
used
I'm
for?
going to have to call it there. We have drifted into drinking heavily and vaping. So I think this is the time to maybe put a close on it. I do appreciate so much, Jay Townley and Steve Hansen, your time and spending it here with us at the Laidback Bike Report and lending your expertise to it. It's been so valuable, I'm sure, to our audience and to me. So thank you very much for that. And Doug, we're going to see you again soon, I'm sure. Doug, thank you for all that you did to put this segment together, guys.
Thank
You
you.
bet, Gary.
Okay. All right, let's finish it up, guys. I want to thank the amazing sponsors who make the Laidback Bike Report possible. Who are they? Well, let's start it out with TerraCycle. From fairings to headrests, whatever accessory you need, Pat and crew have you covered. And Trailside Trikes. If you find yourself in Florida, near the Withlacoochee Trail or in Knoxville, Tennessee, check out Andrew's shop and amazing crew. And TerraTrike and Greenspeed Trikes. Your vision, whatever it is, TerraTrike has a trike to take you there. And Greenspeed cutting-edge designs create performance through Aussie ingenuity. And Laid Back Cycles, the top USA dealer for TerraTrike and the premier source for CatTrike, Ice, and Greenspeed. We give you the freedom to ride. And Avenue Trikes. With the gearing you need and the comfort you want, it's time to enjoy riding again. They're in stock, ready to ship, and only $19.95. Dealer inquiries are welcome. And Azub. In addition to the titanium suspension, another technological gem brought to you by Azub is the optional folding mechanism. It is not only easy to operate, but works great and looks fantastic. And Recumbent PDX, CatTrike's West Coast Megastore. Schedule your test rides on trikes with pedal assist electric from both Bosch and Bafang, roll-off and schlump component groups, and adaptive builds. Experience the joy of CatTrike. And EcoCycles. Adding e-assist to your bent can be a daunting task. With total focus on customer service, the experts at EcoCycles make this upgrade simple and worry-free. Check out EcoCycles today. All right, guys, we will be back with you on February 5th, 2 p.m. Eastern Time with another great show. Working on it now. So we hope you will join us then. Now, how can you support the Laid Back Bike Report? If you like what we've done today and want to see us continue doing reports like this and more, you can like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and don't forget to click the little white eye up there, which will take you to the Laid Back Bike Report, where you can find our past shows, future shows. You can buy a hat like you saw Larry Seidman wearing today. You're going to see him in a second again. And we also had a viewer that actually wanted to buy a hat during the show. So it's a great way to support us, and they look terrific. You can also become a Patreon for the Laid Back Bike Report, going to patreon.com and searching for the Laid Back Bike Report. We'll do that. You can do so for as little as $1 a month. So thanks to all of our current Patreons. We really appreciate your support. All right, bring up whoever's left on this marathon show here. Larry, here we go. And we have Jay, and we also have Zach there as well as wonderful crew. We really appreciate you guys being with us today and all the help you did. That was a marathon one there, Larry. So thanks. And Trey, thanks for all your help as well. And Zach, we hope to see you again soon. Doug, thanks a lot, pal. And that is going to just about do us for today on the Laid Back Bike Report. So until our next webcast, from all of us here at the Laid Back Bike Report, so long, Bent Riders.